Greetings, and thank you for visiting Creepshow, your go-to channel for the most disturbing stories from the annals of criminal history. We are going to dig into the terrifying world of serial stranglers today. These are individuals who have committed murders by using the cruel method of strangulation to end the lives of their victims. From the notorious Brownout Strangler of World War II, Australia, to the elusive Wednesday Strangler of Japan, we explore the terrifying tales of these murderers who left a trail of horror and death in their wake. Prepare yourself for a terrifying adventure as we unveil the top 10 most notorious people who have ever been accused of strangling someone. When most people think about serial killers, they typically picture someone who stabs or shoots their victims. This is the primary image that comes to mind. On the other hand, strangulation is an additional way that some of the most heinous serial killers have utilized in order to take the lives of their victims. Compressing a person's windpipe or certain blood vessels in order to cause them to suffocate and die is the act that is known as strangulation. Strangulation is a method of murder that can be both excruciating and extreme in its severity. If the perpetrator is cautious to maintain their anonymity, it typically leaves behind very little proof. Because of fatal inside injuries, some of the survivors have passed away. Despite the fact that strangling or choking victims is the most common form of domestic violence, even serial killers have been known to adopt this particularly twisted method of murdering. Choking someone is a sort of power or control that is regarded to be exercised over the victims. Straining victims can cause them to lose consciousness in a matter of seconds, and death can occur within minutes of the incident. This is because the carotid arteries in the neck get blocked, which prevents oxygen from reaching the brain and causes the condition to occur. Additional methods by which victims of strangulation lose consciousness include the obstruction of jugular veins and the obliteration of the victim's airway. These acts of strangling, particularly those that are associated with serial killers, are included on our list and discussed today. The names of some of these killers are well known, while the names of others are essentially never spoken. In what ways are they similar to one another? They all killed their victims by strangulation. The Brownout Strangler, number 10. On December 12, 1917, Eddie Joseph Leonski was born into this world. His parents were immigrants from Russia and the Jewish community, and he was raised in a home where drunkenness was prevalent and there was a lot of abuse. It was because of his mother's tendency to be overprotective and controlling that he was frequently tormented at school. During his time as a soldier in the United States Army, Eddie traveled throughout Australia in 1942 and then went on to serve in World War II the following year. The private, who was 24 years old at the time, murdered 3 ladies by strangling them while he was on tour within Melbourne, Australia. The first person he victimized was a woman named Ivy Violet McLeod, who was 40 years old. Her body was discovered in the inner suburbs of Albert Park, where she had been beaten and strangled to death. The following week, Leonski carried out another attack, this time resulting in the death of Pauline Thompson, who was 31 years old. The following week, Leonski committed the murder of Gladys Hosking, a woman who was also 40 years old and attended the University of Melbourne. He intended to murder other women, but some of them managed to evade his assaults and were later used as witnesses to support his conviction for the atrocities he committed. One of the reasons Leonski became known as the Brownout Strangler was because he committed his murders in low-light conditions. The young man responded that he was fascinated by feminine sounds when he was questioned about the reasons he committed the murders. In an effort to get the voices of women, he killed them by strangling them through the neck. During the course of Eddie's trial, it was speculated that he had a criminal alter ego who was responsible for the crimes. On November 9, 1942, Eddie was given a sentence that required him to be executed by hanging. The Schoolgirl Strangler, number 9. On the 12th of December in the year 1899, Arnold Karl Sodeman was born. His upbringing was characterized by instability, and he was raised in Victoria, Australia. In addition to his mother, his father and grandfather also passed away in mental facilities, and his mother also experienced bouts of amnesia. Arnold went away from his family for a short time when he was 13 years old. Theft, armed robbery, and assaulting a station master were among the many offenses for which he was sentenced to prison. He also spent time for these offenses. After some time, Sodeman decided to settle down, and he eventually became a father to a girl. Nobody had any idea what would happen next. Arnold, who was 31 years old at the time, kidnapped Mina Griffiths, who was 12 years old. After luring her away from a playground, he brought her to an abandoned building and strangled her to death there. A girl called Hazel Wilson, who was 16 years old at the time, was murdered by him the following year. 2 more young women were murdered by Sodeman in 1935. Ethel Belshaw, who was 12 years old, and June Rushmer, who was 6 years old, were both strangled. Following the recovery of Ethel's body, Arnold's co-worker stated that they had seen him in the vicinity of the crime site a few moments earlier. Arnold was irritated by the joke that the co-worker made to him, and he claimed that he had never been there. Arnold later confessed to the crime, offering explicit details, and his co-workers were the ones who informed the authorities. Arnold was known for his hallmark method of disposing of victims, which consisted of leaving them chained, strangled, and gagged. On the 1st of June in 1936, he was put to death by hanging. The Accra Heist, number 8. Accra, Ghana was Charles Kwabena Ibo Kwanzaa's home, and he was employed as a mechanic within the city. Kwanzaa, who was born in 1964, is suspected of having murdered more than 34 women throughout the course of his life. It was in the year 2000 when he was initially taken into custody for the murder of his girlfriend, Joyce Boateng. During this time period, police enforcement was able to establish a connection between Kwanzaa and another crime that had been committed in 1996. In that case, a woman called Aqua Serwa was discovered dead from a strangulation near a local stadium. The mechanic had been followed by the authorities because they believed he might be involved in these crimes. In addition, he admitted to having strangled 8 women in Accra, which is the capital city of Ghana, while he was serving his sentence. In the years leading up to his relocation to Accra, Kwanzaa was incarcerated for a variety of offenses, including robbery and abusing 2 different women. The charges against him for the series of murders were brought against him on July 11, 2002, in Accra. This led to Kwanzaa being sentenced to death by hanging after he was officially accused with the murder of 9 women who had been strangled to death. Tacuba, the Strangler, number 7. Gregorio Cardenas Hernandez is widely considered to be one of the most notorious killers in the annals of Mexican history. His birth year was 1915, and he spent his childhood in Mexico City. His parents were originally from the state of Veracruz. It appeared as though Gregorio had a prosperous future in store for him. The National Autonomous University of Mexico has provided him with a scholarship that would allow him to pursue a degree in chemistry. Additionally, Hernandez was afflicted with an ailment known as encephalitis, which is characterized by inflammation of the brain membranes. It was the sickness that caused him to suffer nerve damage. In the year 1942, Hernandez committed the act of murdering 3 young prostitutes and a fellow chemistry student named Graciela Arias Avalos. This occurred within a span of a few weeks. He is thought to have buried the victims in his garden, according to the theory. Almost immediately after that, he admitted himself to a mental health facility alone. The deaths were discovered by the authorities, and Hernandez was taken into custody when he was summoned by neighbors who were suspicious of him. In the midst of his life term, he managed to break out of prison, but he was brought back. Hernandez was granted a pardon by Luis Echeverria, the President of Mexico, in the year 1947. In later years, he completed his legal education and went on to devote the rest of his life to practicing law. The Panama Strangler, number 6. Silvano Ward Brown is the first person to ever commit a serial murder in Panama. His birthday is September 19, 1941, and he was born in Puerto Armuelles. Although he had a typical upbringing throughout his childhood, his father abandoned him when he was 9 years old. Brown began to get into trouble with the absence of his father's influence in his life, and he even spent 2 years in juvenile prison as a result of his actions. At the tender age of 18, he was responsible for his very first murder. Although he was breaking into the house of a young woman named Paula Caballero, who was 18 years old, he stabbed her. During the subsequent 12 years, Silvano was incarcerated on the island of Coiba. After he was released from prison in 1969, he went on to kill 2 prostitutes within a week of his release. Brown confessed to all 3 of his crimes when the authorities established a connection between him and the 2 suffocation incidents. In the course of a psychiatric evaluation, it was discovered that Brown was a psychopath who lacked any moral framework. His violent and deadly outbursts were attributed to his illness, according to the doctor's findings. Following the completion of his 20-year prison sentence, he was granted his freedom and is currently employed as a security guard in Panama. The Stockwell Strangler, number 5. In 1963, Kenneth Erskine was born in Hammersmith, which is located in England. When he was a little boy, both of his parents left him behind, most likely because of the particular needs he had acquired. As a consequence of this, he was a violent child, attended a number of special schools, and also attempted to drown his friends while they were on field excursions. In order to make ends meet for a period of time, Erskine engaged in a number of robberies and thefts. In spite of this, he ramped up his criminal activity in the year 1987. After that, Erskine started committing a string of strangulations on old people, both male and female. Every single one of his victims was murdered in the same manner. They were strangled and left in their beds with the covers pulled up to their chins without any clothing on. On July 28th, Kenneth was taken into custody for attempting to conceal one of the numerous bank accounts he possessed. His prints were then matched to 7 different murders by the authorities. Additionally, Frederick Prentice, who was one of his victims who survived, was able to recognize Erskine from a lineup. During the course of his trial, Erskine asserted that he was suffering from amnesia and stated, "I do not remember killing anyone." In spite of this, he was given 7 sentences of life imprisonment and was obliged to go through a period of 40 years of incarceration before being eligible for release. The Sunderland Strangler, number 4. Sunderland, England was the location of Stephen John Grieveson's birth in the year 1970. Because of the string of ligature strangulations he committed on 4 children, he was given the nickname ligature strangulation. It was between the years 1990 and 1994 that he was found guilty of the murder of 4 teenage lads. The murder of a young kid named Simon Martin, who was 14 years old, began in the year 1990. Then, when Stephen was 23 years old, he committed the murder of Thomas Kelly, who was 18 years old, in a shed. In the subsequent 3 months, he was responsible for the deaths of 2 further young boys, David Hansen and David Grief, both of whom were 15 years old. After Grieveson was arrested for burglary on March 11, 1993, he was charged with the murders of 3 boys in 1995. The murders occurred within the same year. Following a trial that lasted for 6 weeks, he was given 3 life terms, in which he would not be eligible for parole until he had served 35 years. The year 2014 marked the year when Grieveson was finally charged with the murder of Simon Martin. Later on, he said that he had murdered 3 of the lads in order to hide the fact that he was homosexual. The Suffolk Strangler, Section 3. The family of Stephen Wright spent their childhood in the village of Erpingham, which is located in Norfolk. On the 24th of April in 1958, he was born. Because of the divorce that occurred between their parents, he had one brother and two sisters, all of whom lived with their father. At the age of 16, Wright left school and joined the Merchant Navy, where he eventually landed a position as a chef. Pamela Wright, a woman who was not related to him, was the person he eventually met, and the two of them moved in together. Stephen led a second life, partaking in activities such as gambling, drinking, and regular visits to hidden brothels. His murders of 5 prostitutes in Ipswich took place in the year 2006. In 2008, a jury decided that Stephen was responsible for the crimes, and he was given a sentence of life in prison. Additionally, he is a suspect in at least 5 additional murder cases, some of which are still being investigated at this time. Wright was referred to as a real Jekyll and Hyde character by a neighbor of his. 2. The Unsolved Mystery of Wednesday. Of all the characters on our list, the Wednesday Strangler is the one that holds the most mystery. He is a serial murderer who has not been recognized and is believed to be from Japan. It was on a Wednesday evening that 6 out of 7 of the people who were thought to be his victims disappeared, which led to the creation of the label Ghost Killer. The crimes committed by the Wednesday Strangler are hypothesized to have occurred between the years 1975 and 1989. There have been 7 women murdered in Saga Prefecture, and it is believed that the perpetrator is responsible for all of them. The Saga women murders is another name for this string of homicides that have been committed. It was discovered that 5 of the women had been strangled to death. However, only the skeletons of the other 2 individuals were recovered. Therefore, it is not known how they passed away. A man was taken into custody in 1989 for a crime that was unconnected to the one he was accused of. In the end, he was found not guilty of the murders he admitted to having committed. As of this day, the case has not been solved. As of right now, it is not clear whether there was more than one murderer. 1. The person who kills Foundling wheels. The story of Louisa de Jesus tends to be more reminiscent of a script for a horror film than it is of a real-life historical occurrence. Her birthday is December 10th, 1748, and she was born in Portugal. Because she was having problems making ends meet, she devised a scheme that was both heinous and heartless in order to generate some additional revenue. For the purpose of preventing infants from being abandoned, Foundling wheels were utilized in the 17th century. It was possible for moms who were unable to keep their kids or who did not wish to do so to give them to another person through the use of this technology. After placing the youngster in the wheel, they would ring the church bell, which would communicate the situation to the priests and nuns. Parents who made the decision to adopt a child were eligible to receive a monetary award from the government. Louisa made the decision to take advantage of this arrangement. Through the use of her true identity and many identities, she adopted more than 30 children. Then she would suffocate or strangle the children, and then she would bury them in graves that were not very deep. What in the world could possibly go wrong? Lucia would not be apprehended until the year 1772, when a woman made the discovery of one of the tombs for the first time. Once the authorities were able to identify the murdered youngster, Louisa promptly admitted to being the person responsible for the murder. After conducting a check of her residence and land, they discovered the dead corpses of 33 infants. Despite the fact that she had adopted a total of 34 children, she consistently refused to reveal the location of the final child. Louisa was put on trial for committing 33 charges of murder and was given a penalty of being garroted. As far as Portugal's history is concerned, she is the last woman to be put to death. We are grateful that you have chosen to accompany us on this disturbing voyage through the dark world of the most notorious stranglers in the history of the globe. Be sure to give this episode a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell if you found it to be engrossing. This will ensure that you never miss another spine-chilling story from Creepshow. Post your opinions in the comments section below. Who do you consider to be the most scariest of the bunch? Be sure to stay tuned for other terrifying and mysterious stories. Be sure to keep your lights on and exercise caution until we meet again.